Greetings, fellow painters! Today we're going to paint Doctor Strange for the Marvel Zombies board game. During this tutorial, we're going to look at mixing the blue mid-tone color of his shirt with a bright red paint to create a purple shadow color. By mixing the blue mid-tone of the shirt into the shadow color, we should achieve a smooth transition in the values as we layer up from the dark shadows to the brighter blue colors. This video is a direct follow-up to our Paint a Red Cape video, where I detail the painting of Doctor Strange's cape. The painting of the cape will still be presented in this video, but if you desire more detail, we will provide a link to the Paint a Red Cape tutorial at the end of this video. Welcome to Trehane Miniatures. Beginning with a miniature fully primed in black, we're going to first mix blue and red paint together to create a purple shadow color that will be used as the base for Doctor Strange's red cape and blue shirt. The colors that I'm using for this are Bold Pyrrole Red by Monument Hobbies and Flat Blue by Vallejo. I start with a healthy amount of red on my palette, then I add small amounts of blue until I achieve the desired purple color. I will thin the mix a bit with water so that the first coat dries fairly translucent, and this will act as the strongest shadow color in the deep recesses. I will apply a second coat of this to boost the intensity of the purple everywhere except for where I want the deepest shadows. I'm also covering the edge of the cape that will later be painted yellow. Since purple is the complementary color to yellow, this will make a fine transition color for the fringe of the cape. From this point, the painting of the cape and the shirt will branch into two different paths, where I will gradually add more red to the purple for the cape and add more blue to the purple for the shirt. Continuing with just the cape now, we will add more Pyrrole Red to what's left of the purple mix. We won't add any more blue to this mix, and we want to have more red than purple in the mixture. This will create a dark red hue that we will use to begin building up our bright red highlights. This color will cover most of the purple. We will want to leave some pure dark purple in the deepest recesses and blend the color out from there. When painting this color next to a recess that we want to remain purple, we will begin the stroke in the purple area and finish the stroke in the area that we want to eventually be bright red. With the paint properly thinned with about 50% water, this should create a natural looking transition from the purple to the red, and this is why we use the red mid-tone color when creating the purple shadow. For the next layer of our red cape, we will use pure Bold Pyrrole Red. I'm switching to a size 1 synthetic brush at this point so that I can work with a little more precision. This Pyrrole Red will be the mid-tone color for the cape and the color we want the cape to read. So more of the visible surface area of the cape will be this color than any other color. We will work within the dark red layer that we painted in the previous step and apply the paint in the same manner that we used for the dark red. We will begin each stroke in the dark red area and pull the stroke to the point on each fold in the cape where we want the red to be the brightest. For the highlights, we're going to add some ice yellow to the Pyrrole Red. Initially, this first highlight will look a little pink, even though it's a yellow that we're adding to the red. We'll cover very little area with this color. Now it's more important to make sure to begin our strokes from the shadow side and pull our strokes towards the light source, and finishing at the brightest point on each fold in the cape. More paint will be deposited at the end of the stroke than at the beginning, so this is a natural way to increase the intensity of the highlight at a point where you want it to be the brightest. Finally, we'll add a little more ice yellow to the mix for the final highlights. Now I've switched to a size 1 sable brush for the fine details. I've increased the yellow in this mix to the point where it looks more yellow than pink, so we want to apply this highlight color very sparingly. With the exception of edge highlighting, I will apply these highlights with strokes that are perpendicular to the length of the folds in the cape, and I'll use short strokes and stippling to create some texture on the cape. I will also occasionally go back to pure Pyrrole Red, thinned heavily with water, to glaze in the transitions between the mid-tone and the highlights, and the mid-tones and the shadow area. Moving on to the blue shirt, we will begin with the same purple shadow color and add some more flat blue to it to create a dark blue hue to begin building up to our bright blue highlights. You'll want to use closer to a 50-50 mix of these two colors for the first coat because of how much this blue tends to overpower the red. We're going to follow the same principles when painting the blue shirt as we did when painting the cape. Almost all of the purple base color will be covered in this step. Our paint is thinned with water. In the locations where we want to leave a little of the pure purple showing in the extreme shadows, we'll begin our stroke next to the purple shadow and finish within the blue part of the shirt. Our mid-tone color for the shirt will be pure flat blue. We're going to primarily focus on all of the raised folds and any of the upward facing parts of the shirt. We will work solely within the previously painted dark blue layer, and this color will not go near the deep purple shadows. Draw your strokes towards the top of each fold and finish at a point that would catch the most light. We will create our highlight color by adding ice yellow to the flat blue. Blue is one of the few colors that I feel works really well with pure white to make lighter highlight colors. So if you don't want to use ice yellow, matte white will work just fine here. The ice yellow is close enough to white that it creates a nice light blue highlight color without creating a green tint to the blue, similarly to the way that it turned the Pyrrole Red pink instead of orange. I'm choosing to use ice yellow for the highlight color for Doctor Strange because that's what I'm using as the highlight color for all of the minis in this game to maintain a uniform look across all of the models. I'll add a little more ice yellow to the mix for the final highlights. At this point, I also switch back to my size 1 sable brush for detailed highlights. When I apply these highlights, I use short, fine strokes, so I prefer the precision that a sable brush provides. I have just recently started using a Kolinsky sable brush. In fact, this is only the second model that I've painted using this brush. I only use it for painting the fine details of the model in an attempt to increase the life of the brush. I use my synthetic brushes for everything leading up to the fine details. The white emblem on Doctor Strange's chest will actually be painted with a mix of Payne's Gray and matte white. First, I'm going to base coat the entire emblem in pure Payne's Gray to cover any of the stray paint marks from painting the shirt. Then I'm going to mix it with white to create a medium light blue-gray shadow color for the white emblem. Once the shadow color is in place, I'll use pure matte white for the edge highlights, and I'll add a highlight to the upward facing part of the emblem on the right side of his chest. We're going to use Orange Brown by Vallejo and Demonic Yellow by the Army Painter to paint the yellow components of this model. For the sash around Doctor Strange's waist, I'm going to use the existing purple layer that I painted earlier as a shadow color. I'll apply this orange brown imperfectly over the purple. The mix of orange brown and purple in the recesses will make a fine shadow color, and any of the raised areas that don't have a perfectly opaque orange-brown color will later be covered with the next 2 layers of highlight colors. The gloves will be painted with a similar approach. I'm painting the orange-brown directly over the black primer on the gloves. Here, I will make sure that I'm covering every bit of black primer, but I'm not necessarily worried about complete opacity. I'm going to apply 3 more layers of lighter colors to build up the final highlights, and this is going to go pretty quickly. I'm also taking advantage of the orange-brown that is on my palette to throw down a sloppy layer of paint over the shield of Vashante that Doctor Strange is standing on. This is really just a test to see if I want to try some fast non-metallic metal for the seal. The symbol is normally found on the 3rd story window of the Sanctum Sanctorum, aka Doctor Strange's house, but the game art has it looking more like a metal coin or manhole cover or something. A fast application of non-metallic metal here sounds good because I'm not sure it makes sense to have him standing on a window. For the next layer, I'm mixing Demonic Yellow in with the Orange Brown. This layer is applied quickly over the sash and gloves. I'm swiping the wet brush aggressively over the raised surfaces of these areas. I'm basically taking an approach as if I was doing a single direction dry brush and just letting the raised surfaces do all of the work by catching the appropriate amount of paint from my brush. This is the stage of the painting process where I start to get a little lazy. I feel I have to choose my battles wisely. You know, where do I really want to spend my time on this mini? I still have the face and possibly some non-metallic metal ahead of me. I continue to toy with the idea of non-metallic metal for the seal. If applying these yellows to the Window of the Worlds doesn't look right, I can always change it later. I am not going to commit much time to it now. Next, we'll move on to pure Demonic Yellow. Using fairly broad strokes, we'll apply the paint to just the upward facing ripples in the sash and the fingertips and forearm area of the gloves. Now it's time to play a little catch-up. I have completely overlooked the yellow cape trim and the eye of Agamotto. Using the orange brown that's still on my wet palette, I will edge the cape and put a base coat on the eye of Agamotto. For the eye, I'm not trying to get orange brown into every recess. The purple that's there will make a nice dark shadow for the yellow metal that we're going to paint there later. I'm going to follow the exact same progression that I used for the other yellow items and add some Demonic Yellow to the orange brown. I'll use this to cover a little less area on the cape trim and eye of Agamotto than I did with the orange brown. This should start feeling pretty routine to you by now. Finally, I'm going to use pure demonic yellow to add some highlights to the cape trim. Working within the previous layer, I'm going to apply this to large portions of the upward facing areas, and I'll completely avoid some of the trim parts that are completely vertical. That way, we have a good progression of color from the shadows to the highlights. I'm going to use this on just the upward facing parts of the Eye of Agamotto, and with that, we're all caught up with the rest of the yellow features of this model. And now that we're back on track, we're going to add some ice yellow to the demonic yellow to highlight all of the yellow features of this model. I'm once again using my size 1 sable brush to add fine lines and dots to highlight the edge of the cape, sash, gloves, and eye of Agamotto. With this color, I am only adding highlights to the most upward facing areas of the cape trim, gloves, and folds in the sash, as well as edge highlighting the eye of Agamotto. Since this is yellow that we're highlighting, we can jump straight to pure ice yellow for the final highlight. This will be used pretty sparingly to just dot in some small highlights and some edge highlighting. With the yellow fabric all wrapped up, I'm going to give a little more love to the Eye of Agamotto. I'm going to thin some muted violet ink by Liquitex and use it as a wash in the crevices of the medallion. I'm also going to use this to shadow around the outside of the Eye of Agamotto. From there, I will re-establish some of the metallic shadow areas with orange-brown. I'll reapply demonic yellow on the upward facing area that follows a diagonal path across the medallion from the model's upper right to its lower left. Then I'll use ice yellow to add a final highlight within this diagonal line that we just established, as well as using it to edge highlight the top of the medallion. We'll use angel green for the gem at the center of the eye. I want to start with a completely opaque base coat of angel green. Then we'll create our highlight by adding matte white to the angel green to make a very light green color. We want a dramatic jump in value for our first highlight color. We just want a small dot of highlight at the top right of the gem where light would be entering the gem, and we want a crescent-shaped highlight at the bottom left of the gem where light would be exiting. Then we'll use a small dot of matte white as a final highlight in the center of each of these two highlights. You can also use this to add some small glints of light to the surrounding metal of the eye. Just 1 or 2 dots will do. I'm using demonic yellow to shape some highlights on the shield of Vishanti. I've decided to commit to the non-metallic metal look for the Window of the Worlds that Doctor Strange is standing on. I'll quickly sketch in where I want these highlights. This isn't the focal point of the piece, so I don't want to spend too much time here. I'm using a mix of demonic yellow and ice yellow to add highlights to the center of the demonic yellow areas. I'm not sure how to describe this, but I'm kind of just scratching in these highlights. It'll give it a brushed metal look when I'm all done, rather than looking like a shiny metal that's highly polished. Then you can use some pure ice yellow to further intensify the central part of these highlights. I'm also adding edge highlights around the shield as I transition to each new color. Using some of the Payne's Gray that is still on my palette, I'll mix it with the orange-brown to make a shadow color for the metal shield. I'll use this in all of the crevices in the shield, and I'll also use it to add some separation to a few of the reflections where I feel I've made them too large. I have this dark color thin to a glaze consistency because I want to decrease the size of some of the reflections as well. Then I'll go back and forth a few times between this shadow color to increase the shadow area and the pure ice yellow to intensify the reflections, until I have achieved the look I'm after. Next, we're going to paint Doctor Strange's pants and the rubble on the base at the same time using the same colors. Beginning with Necromancer Cloak by the Army Painter, we'll base coat the Good Doctor's pants and all of the rocks on the base. We don't have to stress about covering all of the black primer in every crevice, since black makes a great deep shadow color for the dark grays. For the pants, we'll apply a second coat to build up opacity on most of the front-facing and raised surfaces. On the base, we'll apply the paint with a fast, heavy dry brush approach. Now we'll switch to Uniform Gray by the Army Painter. This will be the mid-tone color for the pants, and it will cover most of the Necromancer Cloak on the folds and upward-facing parts of the pants. The base will just get another fast, heavy dry brush with this color, hitting mostly the tops and front side of all of the rocks. Finally, we'll use Ash Gray to highlight the pants. I'll use my size 1 sable brush to paint in the brightest highlights using short strokes. These grays work very naturally together as a progression, so I'm not doing any glazing or refining between layers. The rock will receive a light dry brush of this color, focusing mostly on the front outer edge of the base. I chose German Camo Black Brown to base coat the leather boots, belt, and pouch. Plus, I'm using it as the base for Doctor Strange's flesh. I would have thought that the belt was just part of the yellow sash tied around his waist, but the character art definitely shows it as a brown leather belt. I'm mixing orange brown and German camo black brown together for the next layer of the leather. I'm leaving Doctor Strange's face alone now while I finish up the leather items. I'll start to shape the highlights with this color, covering much of the German camo black brown on the upward and outward facing bits. Next, I'll use orange brown for the final highlight. I'll just dry brush this over the boots and pouch, but I'm going to use more refined highlights using short strokes to create some texture on the belt. The black brown and orange brown are new colors to me, so I'm still exploring what they can be used for. On the belt, I'm actually going to add a little ice yellow to the orange brown to hit the top edges with some more intense highlights and make the central area stand out a little bit more. Tanned Flesh and Barbarian Flesh by the Army Painter are the two skin tones that I've chosen for Doctor Strange's face. The first thing that I'm going to do is mix some German camo black brown in with the tanned flesh to create a transition color between the black brown base coat and the tanned flesh. I'll apply this everywhere except for his eye sockets and the deep recesses where his skin meets the collar. Using just the tanned flesh, I'll get to work painting the oily T-zone of the forehead and bridge of the nose, and I'll also paint both cheeks and his lips. This is a pretty generous first layer. We don't have to be very careful when painting the lips because that part will get cleaned up later when we paint the goatee. Next, we go straight to Barbarian Flesh to further the highlights. We'll hit all of the same areas as before but cover less territory. This will be the brightest highlight that we apply to the left cheek and left side of the forehead. Lastly, we'll dot in some final highlights with ice yellow near Doctor Strange's right temple, the tip of his nose, and his right cheek. After the face, I went and painted the hair, eyebrows, and goatee with German camo black brown. However, I decided to change this off camera to paint it matte black, but I did this after I already highlighted the hair. So just go ahead, grab some matte black, paint the hair, goatee, and eyebrows, and then we'll get to highlighting them. We're going to grab some ash gray by the Army Painter and highlight the bottom of his goatee and the hair at the front of his head. I'm using the side of the brush for this while it is lightly loaded with paint. Then we're going to use some matte white to paint the hair just above his ears. Finally, we're going to use angel green, demonic green, and ice yellow to paint the tentacles on the base. This video has been a little longer than usual. Since you've made it this far, let me know in the comments if the length of this video works for you. Am I blabbing about unnecessary shit, or am I being too redundant on each step? Do I need to expand on some of the ideas presented here? My goal ultimately is to provide quality tutorials as quickly and concisely as possible. I believe that your time is valuable, and I want to respect that. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to join our growing community of painters.